Well, good morning.
Good morning.
It was 8 years ago since I stood before this committee of the Chamber of Commerce down on the other end of this same room. There was a larger crowd, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that that's not indicative of anything else that's happening around. But I also had the opportunity, I should say, as a member of Congress to introduce Ted Poe, who was going to be my opponent for that year. It was interesting that he had not been introduced at the time, so it was a pleasure to do that. And I think that perhaps it was a precursor because many years later, he and I worked on some legislation together when we had the pleasure of serving in the House of Representatives. I'm Nick Lampson. I was born in Beaumont. I grew up here with many of you, went to Lamar University, got a couple of degrees from there, and got married to Susan Floyd from Port Arthur. And we raised our 2 daughters, and now they have 6 children that Susan and I spend our time with. This is my home. I've been a public servant here for some 40 years, 11 years teaching in the South Park Independent School District, now Beaumont, and Lamar University, and 30 years as an elected official. But together we've seen Beaumont change quite a bit, but one thing seems to always remain the same. We pretty much stick together. And no matter how rough the political winds, or even the hurricane winds have gotten, we stick together. But Congress isn't sticking together today. There seems to be a lot of whining in Congress. It's divisive, it's petty, and that's why I'm running, to stop the arguing and start the fixing. Most of you know at least much of my record, and it consists of things that we accomplished together by sticking together. When I began to look at this congressional district, which includes Jefferson County, Galveston County, and 2/3 of Brazoria County, I began to think of my own experiences, not just in the Congress, but before and after my service in the Congress. And I remembered that I was an oil patch Democrat. That's a caucus in the Democratic Party of people that support the petrochemical industry. The oil patch Democrats support domestic drilling, offshore drilling, and other activities within the petrochemical, this huge petrochemical complex that resides more than half between the whole country, between Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and Corpus Christi, and much of that located in the middle of it, which is here in our part of the Texas coastline. The experience that I gained in working with ports, not just the ones that are in this congressional district, Beaumont, Port Arthur, Texas City, Galveston, and Freeport, but also with the Port of Houston, and all the activities that have to do with the waterways on this upper 130 miles or so of the Texas coastline, including the same distance of the Intercoastal Canal. And working with the committees on transportation and the subcommittees that oversee the Coast Guard and the Corps of Engineers, the other activities that help us grow in order for our businesses to be able to do business and compete with other places in the world. I remember that I made many very fiscally conservative votes as a member of the Blue Dog caucus in the House of Representatives. The Blue Dogs are the moderate and fiscally conservative Democrats who have proposed a number of things that will be very good for Congress, and we're able to do a lot to accomplish their tasks until the people began to send them home in lieu of electing people who were more partisan, and we further divided our country as the Blue Dog Democrats reduced its number from close to 60 to a little under 30. And yeah, the federal debt has grown to a point where it is dangerously high. What I find interesting is that today, while the debt ceiling votes have become a political football that we play games with, and that's put us into the shape with the poor fiscal rating that Mr. Weber referred to a little while ago. That football wasn't being played then, but I never once in the years that I voted on these issues in the House of Representatives did I vote to raise the debt ceiling. And I worked as hard as I possibly could along with those Blue Dog Democrats to promote something called pay-go, pay as you go. If you're going to put something new in the budget, you're going to take something out of the budget elsewhere so that it at least stays budget neutral. We need to have pay-go rules in the House of Representatives. I was in the Congress when we balanced the budget for the first time in a generation. And you know how we did it? We did it by working together, not complaining. I did things a little differently in the Congress. When I very first went there, just a few months after I took my oath of office, there was a little girl not far from here named Laura Kate Smither who had been abducted and murdered. And I was with her parents when they were told their body had been found. And I was so moved by what I had seen with that I went back to Congress and I started looking to see what members of Congress had been doing. They passed some legislation that had to do with child protection, but nobody was doing anything in a coordinated effort. And so I created the Congressional Caucus on Missing and Exploited Children. And what's interesting is it became the largest bipartisan issue-based caucus in the House of Representatives in less than a year. And people worked together, not just on those issues that were less controversial, but across party lines to do other kinds of things. In my last year in the Congress, I created, with 5 of my colleagues, something that we called the Congressional Center Aisle Caucus. Center Aisle Caucus, you know, it's pretty much the dividing line between the Democrats and the Republicans in the House, but we found that a number of people shared coffee together and conversation in the middle of the room, and we organized that into a formal caucus, called it the Center Aisle Caucus, and we've had one rule. If you were a Democrat, you had to bring a Republican partner to be a member. If you were a Republican, you had to bring a Democratic partner to be a member. Our goal was to create civility in our discussions and to promote common ground, the search for common ground. It was a balanced approach to do things, working on legislation. And I remember a story late in 2008, early in 2008, late in 2007 really, and carried over into 2008, where a bunch of members of Congress were standing in the back of the room listening to a debate on an energy bill. And we commented to each other that everybody that got up wasn't talking about the issues in the bill, but we're talking about what the last person just said. And then the other side would get up and talk about the one that last spoke. And it goes back and forth, Democrat and Republican. And we agreed that we needed to go off and write a bill on our own. And we did. 25 of us got a room. Didn't allow lobbyists to come in, didn't allow special interests, didn't allow committees, didn't allow anybody, but if we wanted to bring someone from our office, we could. And the 25 of us wrote a balanced energy policy for the United States of America that when we introduced it, picked up 150 votes in the Congress almost immediately before it was then killed by the special interests of this nation. The deterioration of relationships in Congress is significant, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm running for Congress to stop the arguing and start the fixing. I worked beyond party lines. The caucuses that I created show that we can work together when we try, if we believe in something bigger for tomorrow than what we have today. The culture in the Congress is to keep us separate, and we're in gridlock, accomplishing nothing. So without a change in attitude, we won't accomplish anything like fixing the healthcare situation. And we need to re-examine healthcare reform. But you know what? Polls show that there are aspects of healthcare reform that are popular among all Americans. Things like the fact that we can't be denied coverage for pre-existing conditions, or that we have to keep children on their parents' insurance until they're 26 or until they get situated in their own lives. It's wrong for us to continue to pay for people who go to emergency rooms and get the highest form of care, and then we end up having to pay that along the way. We can do better. And we need, in my opinion, to approach it, as I just said a minute ago, in a balanced way. And you know what? The Congress did that when I was there in 2003. It passed in the House of Representatives a bill called the Patient's Bill of Rights with a vote of 3-1, more than 3-1. Both parties supported it overwhelmingly. And they did it because they were able to sit down and craft something that went beyond one piece of the problem that we face. Insurance reform is this bill, is this law today. But we need to address all the parts of health care, including physician reform, legal reform and access to courts, insurance reform, pharmaceutical reform, as well as, thank you, Tom, as well as our ability to choose our own, to a greater extent, patients choose their work with who they want for their healthcare professionals to deliver their care. We can do those kinds of things again, working together. Well, our relationship, this one, within our community, and consider it for yourselves. Each of us has built ourselves to be an asset for our community. It's been built over decades with the work that you did in your own businesses, no differently from me, as I prepared myself for community service. I wanted to do something for my community that gives my grandchildren, all 6 of them, Randy, the opportunity to grow into the same type of life that my parents and grandparents gave for me. I have seniority of 10 years in this Congress. When I go back to Congress in January, I'll be able to start largely where I left off and do things effectively for my community. I have the knowledge of how the committees work, the process works, the city councils, the commissioners' courts across this congressional district, because I've worked with them. I've sat in the Corps of Engineers offices. I've sat in the Coast Guard offices. I've sat in the offices of those organizations that will work with each of you as we determine what our needs are for our community, and a good representative to be there to make them become a reality. Sabine Neches, obviously, the main issue there is the deepening to 48 feet so that our goods can be shipped into and out of our ports and jobs can be gained. That can only happen if you send someone to Congress who has the experience and knowledge to negotiate with the Corps and can bridge the partisan divide and deliver real results. I brought the saltwater barrier to the Neches River in 1999. It was completed in 2004. It was legislation that I worked on, and the people here, some of you perhaps in this room, went there to help me sell it to the appropriate authorities in the Congress. Well, I am honored to be from Beaumont and to have represented this community, its citizens, and its businesses as a U.S. Congressman. And it's truly been one of the great joys of my life. But one last thing. In my last 2 years in Congress, I received the Spirit of Enterprise Award from the United States Chamber of Commerce, much to the chagrin of some of my Democratic friends and supporters. I had a higher score when I won those awards than Senator John Cornyn did in the Senate of the United States. I'm proud to have delivered for Southeast Texas. My goal is to be the best possible representative for my community and my district, regardless of the makeup of the Congress and the White House. I worked with both President Bush and President Clinton in the past to achieve this goal. And whoever our next president is, I will work with him and the Republicans and Democrats in the U.S. House of Representatives and in the Senate to create an environment in which Beaumont can thrive. So today I ask you for one thing. I ask you to vote your interest, not your party. I ask you to vote for Beaumont. And I ask you to vote for Nick Lampson to be your next representative from the 14th Congressional District of Texas. Thank you very much.